The worst thing you can ever see in an NBA game is a star player go down with a serious injury. All it takes is one to alter the entire course of an NBA player's career, because they have lasting effects on players and sometimes take guys out permanently. But that wasn't the case for these 10 players, because instead, they came back and played either better than ever or better than anyone ever expected them to. Like first up in Paul George, whose major injury took place back in 2014. Now leading up to it, PG was in the middle of breaking out into a superstar. In 2013, he had just gone from a role player to making the All-Star team and being the NBA's most improved. And in 2013 and 14 was his big year because he made the All-Star team a second straight season and bumped his averages up to 21, 7, and 6. But this season was the one where he really took control of the team. Danny Granger had been leading them up until that point. But when he went down with yet another injury, George stepped up, and it continued all the way until the postseason, where the Pacers took the Miami Heat to Game 6 in the Eastern Conference Finals. Well, then they lose, and that was just the start of PG's terrible offseason, because he becomes part of the 2014 FIBA national team, and in a scrimmage, not even in a real game, he goes up to block James Harden's layup, falls into the goalpost, and breaks his leg. This is described as one of the nastier injuries you'll ever see. Honestly, I don't recommend looking it up, and I still don't even know what it looks like because I haven't seen the actual thing. But it was one people saw and said that it could put a serious stop to his NBA career. It could really slow him and his momentum down, and he was expected to miss the entire 2014 and 15 season. Well, only 2 months later, he was already shooting jump shots. By February, he was cleared for practice, and he made it in time to play the final 6 games of the season. He came back quicker than most, but then from there on, got better every single season and still became a superstar, and now these days it's really as if that injury never happened. There's no signs in his game that it affects him at all to this day. And to go from people thinking your career might be over to many not even remembering that it happened makes for an incredible comeback. Switching gears, now as we know, the worst injury any NBA player can endure is one to the Achilles, and it's taken out the likes of Elgin Baylor, Kobe Bryant, DeMarcus Cousins, Elton Brand, Brandon Jennings, Patrick Ewing, and Rudy Gay. Not even some of the greatest of the game can escape the effects it can have. It immediately affects players' athleticism to the point where they're never the same again, except for 2 players, Kevin Durant and Dominique Wilkins. Also shout out to Klay Thompson, who's handling his pretty well and is headed towards playing like his old self again, but for now we're mainly focusing on KD and Dominique. During his last year on the Golden State Warriors, in the second round, KD strained his right calf and missed 9 games. Then returned when the Raptors got up 3-1 in the NBA Finals, but came back way too early because in 2 minutes into the game, he tore his Achilles. There was a lot of talk on if Durant's career was over, but surprisingly, a lot of people said they believed he would come back just fine, even though only one other man had ever done so. But after missing an entire year, he surprisingly came back to exactly where he left off, putting up 27, 7, and 5 his first year back on the best shooting numbers of his career. And this year he's played even better than that. He's dealt with some nagging injuries since his Achilles tear, but you really don't see much of a difference in his athleticism. He's still a great two-way player, and it's not like he's only a shooter now. His game almost shows no difference now than it did pre-injury. As for Wilkins, well, he's a weird freak in nature because given the fact that his game was built almost solely off of his athleticism, and he wasn't a 7-1 guard that could just shoot over everyone, he's one of the guys on the list of Achilles tears you would think definitely would have gotten worse after the injury. But not only did that not happen, he got injured January of 1992 and played at the start of the next NBA season in October of 1992. And the usual time to recover is at least 1 year, but he did so in under 9 months. And in that 92 and 93 season, still played with similar athleticism, made the All-Star team, and put up better numbers across the board than he did before the tear. And for years, like I mentioned, this stood alone as one of the craziest freak of nature incidences in NBA history. Michael Jordan only had one major injury of his own throughout his career, and it was when he broke his foot in his second season in the league. He wanted to rush back from it, but the team wasn't letting him. He kept trying, but the Bulls told him if he rushes back too soon, there's a 10% chance to re-injure his foot, and if that did happen, he would never play another NBA game. Well, eventually he did come back a little sooner than expected, just in time for the playoffs. And during them, he set an NBA record that still stands to this day when he scored 63 points in a playoff game against the Boston Celtics, which was the game that Larry Bird said God had disguised himself as Michael Jordan that night. So there was a 10% chance that MJ hurt himself again, and we never saw any of the Air Jordan era. But instead, not only did we see it, but he came back and set an NBA record, and the rest is history. While on the other hand, Willis Reed was playing in Game 5 of the 1970 NBA Finals, where he tore a muscle in his thigh, and it was so bad he had to sit out Game 6 and was ruled out for the rest of the finals. But when things got down to a Game 7, he went through warm-ups with his team, started the game, and scored the first 2 baskets for his team on his first 2 shots before going to the bench. It was only 2 shots, but it was so great it inspired the whole team for the rest of the night and led them to winning the game for him, making it one of the most memorable comeback performances of all time. Depending on how you look at it, Derrick Rose has had one of the best comebacks throughout NBA history. Sure, after all of his injuries, he's never returned to his NBA form that we were just starting to get to see a glimpse of, but the story's great. He won league MVP, then got so many knee injuries the Bulls traded him in what should have been his prime. Rose bounced around a few teams, then on the Minnesota Timberwolves, we started to see him come back. After years of trying to reinvent his game to be successful in the NBA and do it in a way that wouldn't allow him to keep getting injured, he finally found success again. When he came off the bench for the Wolves and averaged 18 a game, but also at one point broke down in tears because he had a 50-point game where nothing could go wrong. It was a game where he was making threes, attacking the basket, and where he showed himself that he still had it. Then in 2021, he had another huge year where he became the go-to guy for the Knicks. He became the veteran of the team and the one that would usually come in to close out games. And these days, he's developed a jump shot and is shooting over 40% from three. The sad part is he's still continuously suffering from injuries. He only played 26 games of the season and hasn't played more than 50 in 1 year since 2017. Derek's comeback overall hasn't been the prettiest by any means, but there's still been some high spots every couple of years that reminds us all why he was once so great. Another point guard who suffered a knee injury early into his career was Sean Livingston. As a 6'7" point guard, Sean was once a 4th overall pick by the Clippers, and while he never lived up to that much hype, he still had a very successful NBA career. But his first 3 years in the NBA were riddled with injury after injury. He kept getting hurt and only played 92 games in his first 2 seasons. But then in year 3, he suffered one of the worst injuries in the history of the NBA, where he tore his ACL, PCL, meniscus, and sprained his MCL all at once. It was so bad that his leg almost had to be amputated, and it took him months to even learn how to walk again. It took him almost 2 years to return to the league, and when he did, he bounced around to 8 different teams in 5 years before he eventually found a home on the Warriors, where he played for 5 seasons and was lucky enough to be a part of their 3 championships before retiring after that last finals run. But it wasn't all about luck. There was a lot of skill involved with him consistently being one of the best bench players in the NBA coming off of their second unit. One of the comebacks in more recent memory that doesn't get talked about a ton is Gordon Hayward. Back in the 2017 offseason, he signs with the Boston Celtics on a 4-year, $128 million contract. Well, one game into that deal, on the very first game of the season, he jumps up for an alley-oop and destroys his ankle. Again, I don't recommend looking this one up if you got a weak stomach. I got a little queasy watching this one live, but it was tough. Gordon said the injury was mentally and physically draining, and it took him out of action the entire year. And when he came back the next season, he was made to come off the bench, and his game suffered because of it. But ever since then, he's been great and back to his old self, at least when he's been healthy. The most games he's played in a season since then has been 52 due to multiple injuries here and there. But he's still in his prime right now, so let's just hope this is just a small phase he's going through in his career, and it'll soon be over. Either way though, great comeback from a nasty injury. John Wall's been trying to do the same thing, but hasn't really had the opportunity. Also back in 2017, he signed one of the biggest contracts in NBA history, a 4-year, $170 million extension. It was set to kick in the 2019 and 20 season. Well, in 2018 is when he had season-ending heel surgery, then 2 months later fell in his home and ruptured his Achilles, making him the most overpaid player in the league by far ever since. And having both injuries at the same time were so bad that he was forced to sit out for 2 years. Everyone thought his career was over and that when he returned, he'd only be half the player that he used to, but then he got traded to the Rockets, played 40 games for them, and actually came out putting up very similar stats to what he always did. Especially for being out 2 years, it was a shock to everyone. While he was away though, he worked a ton on his game and his shooting, which was always one of his weaknesses, and it clearly paid off. Like Derrick Rose has attempted for years, John Wall taught himself how to slightly shift his game in a way that he could still thrive post-injury. His comeback though isn't complete yet, and for that reason isn't in the same breath as KD and Dominique, because he strained his hamstring and was out for the 2020 season, and since the Rockets were rebuilding this year, they chose to send him out all of the season until they could find a trade, which they never have thanks to his contract. But I think if he ever does make it back onto a good team, his comeback may still impress people. Like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed. I'm out.